record all of our meetings.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I've got it. I'm going to go ahead and do this just in case. Good evening and welcome to the Beaverton Library Advisory Board meeting. We're glad you're here. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. Due to recent changes in Oregon Public Meetings Law, our meetings will now be recorded. Once the video is processed by the city's web team, it will be published on our board's webpage for public viewing. All public attendees are invited to participate in the meeting at the designated opportunities. If you would like to make a comment or ask a question, use the raise hand function on Zoom to indicate so, and we will unmute your microphone for you to share. You can also use the chat feature at any time or submit a question using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Okay. Now, oops. Okay, thank you for your indulgence. Oh, good, Kathleen's here now. Last year, when we added new members, I asked everyone to tell about a time they had benefited recently from using the library. And we got absolutely terrific answers. People talked about nonfiction books that have been useful for a specific purpose, about programs for adults, programs for children, audio books, just a full spectrum of what the library offered, which is fantastic. So I thought tonight for introduction, since we have new members, might be a fun thing to talk about a library memory. Now, I'm not thinking necessarily a childhood memory, but that's fine. It could be something involving your own children. It could be a fond memory, an amusing one, anything relating to an experience, something memorable that happened, not necessarily the Beaverton Library, any particular library.
John?
So we'll go around, introduce ourselves, and you don't have to do that. If you would like to, it would be a great fun thing to share, I think. Andrew, we'll start with you.
Well, I thought we'd approve the minutes first.
Oh, okay, we can do it in that order. I was going to hold off on that since we were short on people, but yeah, since we started with discussing the minutes, so can I get a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
I motion.
Okay, and a second. Sarah.
I'll second.
Okay.
Sorry, was muted.
Good. Okay, now we have everybody. Great. Okay, Andrew, we'll start with you. So the minutes are approved as amended with the one minor change. So Andrew, we'll start with you.
Well, it's kept me sane having all of these ebooks to be able to check out while not being able to go anywhere. So that's been immensely helpful.
Cathy.
So you were talking about childhood memories. I actually have a memory. Well, it's kind of a fun. It's actually when I was very little. I think I was probably 2, and my brother was around 5. We were in the library, and I guess they were doing some sort of story on the local libraries. And they took a picture of my brother and I sitting and reading books at the library. But I gave this look like, "What are you doing?" So they made a comment like a little thing of, "Oh, well, they're enjoying the public library, but Cathy gives a, I don't know about you look to the photographer." So I've always been going to the library, even as a little kid. And it's actually been great for I'd say more, my girls have really enjoyed having the library through all of this. I have girls who likes to read a lot of series. So they've gone through, just eating through various series, and then they'll pass it on to the next one, and then we'll go to another one. So it's been such a nice thing to keep us all sane. I think through, like Andrew said, keep us kind of sane through all of this. So that's been a joy for us.
Good. Sarah. Sara Larson.
All right. I also was a huge fan when I was a kid. pre-internet, so I used to walk down the street and come home with a huge stack of books. But I specifically remember that my library used to do this thing where they would wrap a book in a golden paper and hide it amongst the rest of the books. And whichever kid found it got some sort of prize. I don't remember what it was, but I just remember enthusiastically digging through the books and trying to find this golden book. It was like Willy Wonka.
Oh, I like it. Glenn, do you have a story you'd like to share, or should we skip you?
I do, John, thank you. As a child growing up, we did not have a public library in the village where I grew up, north of Chicago, although we were just north of the border. So for me, going to the library was a real treat because, you know, it wasn't something that happened very often. And fortunately, we did have libraries and well looked after libraries in the school that we attended. And I remember at an early age being drawn to this series of biographies. And I remember checking out books on mostly athletes from different sports, going way back to people like Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. And that really whet my appetite and sort of set me on the path for lifelong learning and reading.
May. Oh, you're muted.
May, I think you're muted.
Oh no.
Just want to share an experience about the interlibrary loan. It's really wonderful. They got me a book from another university actually, and then sent to the library, and then just get it and hold it for 3 months, even longer. I think that's wonderful.
Alicia, would you like to share a story?
I remember when I was in like 4th grade and I was super into like the Percy Jackson series, and sometimes they'd be in like the teen library room, and as a 4th grader you aren't allowed really in there, and so sometimes the book would be in the teen library room, so I'd always feel so cool walking in there and getting the book and not getting in trouble.
Kathleen Perry.
Well, I just wanted to say I'm very into the Percy Jackson series now at 30 something. I'm not allowed into the teen room either, so there we go. I think my favorite library, the one that popped to my mind was, I grew up in Salem, Oregon, and when I was in like elementary school, they would have sleepovers at the library where you would spend all night like amongst the stacks. It was a kids thing. No parents were allowed, which I thought was particularly exciting. It was just like the most magical thing to, you know, be there with your flashlight, and it's 2 in the morning and you reach up and just, you know, strategically place yourself around the reading material you preferred. It was just, I don't know. It was kind of spooky and kind of forbidden, but very exciting. So that was my favorite memory as a kid.
Sounds like fun. Kathleen.
The one that immediately jumped to my mind is my list of priorities when I was a child. My glasses used to give me headaches when I read, and so I'd go to the library and I'd get to my preferred bookshelf, and I'd take off my glasses and I'd put them on the shelf, and then I would take my books and I would take my books to check out and leave, and I would leave my glasses on the bookshelf. And this was a regular occurrence. My father had to go to the library about twice as often as I did in order to pay my late fee, get my glasses. So that was my story, is I always liked books more than anything else.
And Sara.
Yeah, as a child, I didn't have the chance to go into the library. The place where we grew up, we didn't have a very good library. And the library that was there was correct. It's not kind of kids friendly. So after coming to US, when I took my daughter for the first time into the library, I was excited to see a huge, huge library with lot of books, and it was the first moment I felt like these books can be borrowed. Until that, I have to, any book I wanted, I have to own it. And then I realized that was the first memory of mine in US. So the first time when I went to the library, it is the most beautiful experience I had.
Wonderful. Kristin, do you have a story you'd like to share?
Sure. I probably my like shimmering library moment for me was when I was in graduate school, my first year, and I was assigned my very own carrel in the stacks of the library. And it was probably the first time in my life that I had like, it wasn't my apartment, it wasn't my home. It was like my own place with a shelf, and I could put whatever I wanted there. And I would just spend hours in the library just enjoying that feeling of being surrounded by all of this information and literature. And so and I still get that when I work in the library. It's like anything you want to know, it's like humming. So that's it.
I'll share a story too. I grew up in a town of 7,500 in New Jersey. I have a very bad memory, but we had a small volunteer-run library, and I'd exhausted a lot of the collection in various ways by a certain age. In particular, I'd read all the baseball books, fiction and nonfiction. Somebody told me about a Zane Grey baseball novel, and I read that. And I don't know if you know who Zane Grey is, but he was an extremely prolific author of Westerns. He wrote something like 3,197 Westerns and one baseball novel. But I didn't know that. And so I read this one Zane Grey book, and every time I went back to the library, I looked through all these Zane Grey titles, and they must have had 100 of them. Not all in it, all in at different times. And I'd go through them, and one of his Westerns was called The Shortstop, except it had nothing to do with baseball at all. It turns out shortstop is a Western term. I don't even know what it is. Growing up in New Jersey, I didn't even know what a Western was. So I checked out the book, and I read something like, maybe 60 pages into it and figured out, wait a minute, this has nothing to do with baseball. And, I skimmed ahead and figured out, no, I don't want to read this. I don't get it, it's boring. Anyway, did I mention that I have a bad memory? Periodically, I would go to the library and look through the Zane Grey books again, and I'd find this book, The Shortstop, and I must have checked that book out 3 or 4 times, not remembering that this was the same book I had already started that had nothing to do with baseball. And I'd read a few pages and figure it out pretty quickly. Oh yeah, that one. Anyway, it still makes me laugh thinking about that. Looks like we have no public forum tonight, and Councilor Sansucci is not going to be here. And since we're getting the city notes, the news updates, and the information Kristin sends us, I think that's probably enough information. But Glenn, if you have something that wasn't in there that you'd like to add that we should know about.
I'm not sure if this was included in the city notes or not, but the City Council has begun planning for the permanent recruitment, rather, of the permanent city manager position. So some of you may know our current city manager is actually an interim, Kurt Wilson, who started in January, and he is under contract for, I believe it's 6 months. And so the City Council has actually begun planning for the recruitment of the permanent city manager, who will begin the beginning of next fiscal year, which will start in July. So that process is already underway.
Okay, and on to the partner reports, starting with the foundation report.
Yes, so I do have some news to share with the board. If the board will recall, the foundation most recently had been discussing the possibility of the library acquiring a decommissioned van from the city's fleet division for use as a additional outreach vehicle. Well, we met, it was 2 Tuesdays ago with the city's fleet manager, Mike Sturley, and he brought with him a different type of van, a step-up van. Not sure if that's the correct term or not, but it includes a high ceiling that would permit us to invite patrons inside, and has enough space where you could equip it with shelving and outfit it with books and other materials for patrons to browse, and for use as a bookmobile. So earlier this afternoon, the library's outreach team met and indicated their interest in pursuing this. And earlier this week, the foundation, who had a regular meeting scheduled, agreed to sponsor the purchase of this step-up van for the library's use and to add to their fleet for an additional outreach vehicle. And the estimated cost of which for a new step-up van would be approximately $45,000, with the understanding that the Friends would then sponsor the outfitting of the van with shelving and branding and so forth, which will be the next step in the process. So we also have, sort of jumping ahead to the budget, putting in the personnel budget for next year, a request for an additional half-time outreach person to sort of literally drive this, the bus, the new vehicle, and also to provide outreach, to add capacity to our outreach team, which is which has a backlog of requests and cannot keep up with the demand. So adding the personnel capacity and the vehicle capacity will really go a long way in helping the library to extend its outreach capabilities.
Okay. And Kathleen, we're going to talk about the bookstore later. So do you have other Friends news?
Other Friends news. So I wasn't able to make it to the last meeting due to a scheduling conflict, but they have shared their minutes with me. So if you're going to talk about the bookstore, what kind of news would you be interested in hearing now?
Anything else?
Let's see. They talked about the sale of the Book Corner property, talked to the city council about space usage in case they do need to move. Thrift sales are up, online sales are up, and donations are up, and appointment times are increasing. So that's all good news from the Friends.
Okay, good, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Oh, Alicia, you have a question?
I just want to say I donated like 50 books to the Friends recently. So yeah.
Thank you.
Great. And what do you have for us tonight, as far as news from the Teen Council goes?
So as for like what we've done already, we had a Poet X book discussion. We've been going off a lot about like the Black Lives Matter. And then we're probably going to have another game night to socialize, since Zoom, it's kind of hard to like meet all the other members, even though it's like partway through this whole term, I guess I would call it, this year. We haven't really got to like know each other that well. And then like we've been continuing to do our video tutorials. We posted a jewelry making video, which I made, and I guess it's been going really well. And then our podcast is still going. I don't know what we're doing next. I think we're going to discuss that next meeting. And then as for like what we are going to do, we might have a game contest during spring break for like everyone in the community. We're not really sure what game yet though. So we're gonna figure that out since the whole Among Us thing has kind of died out. And then we're going to have our April poetry contest. We're gonna do limericks, and I'm excited to judge that. And then we are going to be opening up our Teen Submarine art contest soon. So I'm excited about that as well on the 15th. And that'll be open to the very beginning of March. So we're already like kind of telling the art teachers or in the school district about this contest. And then, yep. And then one of the other members, we're going to be teaching art probably to the community. We're not really sure what we're going to teach yet. And then there's going to be a coding lesson. An artist is visiting in March for the TLC and is someone I actually know personally. So I'm excited about that. And then maybe like for monthly contests, we're thinking of either like cupcake wars or cardboard creations. And then an origami project in March for like the photo contest. And that's all.
That's a lot.
I was thinking the same thing.
That sounds
Yeah.
incredible. Those are all
Yeah.
amazing. I want to be a teenager.
Right?
Don't we all? Although there's definitely some unfun things about it, if you remember. Did anybody have any questions for Alicia? Okay, we'll move on then to discuss the budget. And you'll remember Glenn had already talked about it and he sent spreadsheets to us. I hope everybody has had a chance to look at them and make whatever sense out of it you can on your own. But Glenn will go through it further with us.
Yes, thank you, John. What I'd like to do is, if it's okay with the board, share my screen and we can go through some of the, at a high level, the budget documents which were attached to the meeting invite, if that's all right. Hearing no objections, I'll go ahead and pull up the first of the two. Can you all see that? All righty, very good.
Yes.
So no real surprises here compared to last year, and that's by intent. So at this year's budget kickoff meeting, our finance director, Patrick O'Clear, asked all the departments to submit their budgets basically at the same level as last year. And so we've done that essentially. And for the library, as Patrick likes to say, basically the library budget consists of two buckets. The biggest of which by far is a personnel budget. The library has one of the largest staffs. We also have one of the oldest staffs. And so that consequently, and given the longevity of many of our staff, many of them are at the highest level of their pay grade. And so consequently, our personnel side of the budget comprises the vast majority of the library's budget, which is not unusual in libraries based on my experience. Libraries tend to have staff who have quite a bit of longevity because libraries, generally speaking, are good places to work and they tend to retain their staff. The other bucket, which is much smaller by comparison, is our materials budget, what we spend on books and other materials. So the board may recall the current fiscal year that we're in, we were asked to reduce our book budget, or had to reduce our book budget, materials budget by $135,000 in order to meet our contingency budget. So our contingency budget is basically 2 months worth of our operating budget that the city requires us to set aside as sort of a rainy day fund for emergencies. Like, for example, should a pandemic break out? I know that's very unlikely, but in such an event, we would have 2 months worth of operating budget that we could use to defray any additional costs that we might incur as a result of such an event. So that has served us very well this year, But of course, in order to set aside 2 months of our operating budget, that cuts into what we can submit for expenditures for our budget. And so when you take into consideration the need to set aside 2 months of our budget for the contingency, plus our cost of living increases, which are built into the collective bargaining agreement, because the city is as a union shop, and the vast majority of the library staff are members of the union, with the exception of the management staff. So cost of living increases, step increases, so annual increases in take-home pay, which are called step increases. Plus, this year, the state is requiring municipalities to kick in additional funds towards the state's pension system, or the PERS system. And so the library's portion of that, based on the number of employees, et cetera, will come to approximately $213,000. So that said, we are probably looking at, so for just to backstep for a second, last year, we had to cut approximately $700,000 out of our budget in order to meet our contingency budget. So this year will be, I anticipate, will be no different because of all the reasons I mentioned, the cost of living increases, the step increases, plus the PERS increase. So I'm anticipating we're going to be asked once we, the city begins its initial review of all the departmental budgets to cut additional funds from the library's budget. Now, last year, in order to make that contingency fund, in addition to making cuts in our budget, the city agreed to provide the library an additional percentage of the sales tax revenue in order to help us meet our contingency. So this year, we've been meeting with the city's assistant finance director, Susan Cole, to help us map out a strategy for how we can meet our contingency budget this year, plus map out essentially a 3-year plan for where we want to be as an organization. And I'm going to share a spreadsheet with the board momentarily, which you've seen before, but it's updated with some information that we're going to be using to create that 3-year plan so that we can anticipate increases. And in addition, more importantly, we could also plan for additional services and personnel that we would like to add in order to help the library achieve its goals, whether it be for additional outreach or other areas, as I'll explain momentarily. So really, there's no news here in this spreadsheet. Basically, it's very similar to last year. One other difference is, and this ties into the library's, or phase 2 of the library's reorganization efforts. So last year at this time, we launched what we have been referring to as phase 1 of the library's reorganization efforts. And that was based out of a desire to bring the library's organizational structure into the 21st century. Because to the best of our institutional knowledge, and Kristin is free to correct me if she believes I'm mistaken, because she certainly has more institutional knowledge than I. The last time the library's organizational structure underwent any change, significant change, was at least 20 years ago. I see Kristin nodding her head. So that said, the library, in spite of that, has been doing some wonderful things over the years, but really hasn't had an organizational structure to support it in being responsive to changes in the needs of the community. So we decided that it was high time that we had an organizational structure that would reflect modern realities and give us the ability to be more responsive to the needs of the community, while also providing additional opportunities for growth and advancement and training across the cross-training across the organization for library staff. So last year we started that effort by realigning our youth and adult services departments and dividing them by function as opposed to age. And so those efforts began in February of last year, and then the following month the pandemic hit. So as a result, those ongoing reorganization efforts unfortunately had to take a bit of a back seat to that thing called the pandemic. However, we've continued to chip away at that and make additional planning and efforts to divide those areas by their function. And this year, we're launching phase 2 of that effort, continuing to reorganize the library by function. And this year's, or phase 2's part of that effort calls for the elimination of our program area access services, which is 0553 in the budget. And what we're doing is, in eliminating that program area, we're going to be teasing out the various functions of that area and reassigning them to other existing functional areas. So for example, the public services portion of the access services division is going to be reassigned to the public services division or program, as the city refers to it. The materials handling function of the access services division is going to be reassigned to the materials program area. So that will also streamline our operations, in addition to helping us realign the organizational structure by function. And also, in an effort to, and I'm sort of jumping ahead to the reorg portion of this, but it also ties into the budget, to further assist our reorganizational efforts and to provide better day-to-day operational, hands-on operational oversight of the library's divisions, or what we're now calling teams. We are proposing the hiring of 2 additional supervisors, one in the materials area and one in the public services area. This will also have the added benefit of freeing up the managers of those areas to focus more of their time and attention on planning and strategy, which is really critical to our organization. And if you compare our staff, our ratio of staff to supervisors to some of our peer institutions, such as Hillsborough and Eugene, you'll see that Beaverton City Library has a much, much higher ratio of staff to supervisors, which has been a challenge for us organizationally, because it forces our managers to spend an inordinate amount of their time managing the day-to-day operations of their teams, and doesn't allow them sufficient time for planning and strategy. So we're proposing the addition of these 2 new supervisor positions to help provide additional capacity for day-to-day operations. And then finally, to help us manage that strategy piece across the organization, we're also proposing the creation of a new position for the library, which is an assistant director position. Currently, the library, along with HR, is the only department in the entire city of Beaverton that does not have an assistant director or a deputy director position. For an organization, referring to the library now, the size, scope, and complexity of the library organization, which is, I mentioned, one of the largest departments in the city, to not have an assistant director to help manage the operations piece of the library, and to also manage the strategy pieces to operationalize them, is really something that is also a challenge for us because we don't have the capacity to do that. So by adding that additional piece, that building that capacity, that assistant director piece, that will help us to implement that strategy, better implement that strategy across the organization, as well as to help oversee and manage all the various projects and initiatives, of which we have quite a few ongoing at any time, whether that be the Book Corner Integration Project, the South Cooper Mountain Development, and a whole host of other projects and initiatives, whether it be the study room build out. So there's quite a few considerable amount of projects and initiatives that the new assistant director position will help us manage to be more efficient in that process better manage those and also bring them to more timely completion, as well as giving us the capacity to do a better job in terms of interpreting data and using it in decision making. Like most or many organizations, the library collects a significant amount of data, and also like many organizations, we don't do a particularly good job of analyzing the data, and that's because we lack the capacity to do so. So having that assistant director piece or capacity position will help us, enable us to spend more time evaluating the data and using it for planning purposes, which will help us organizationally going forward. So with that, what I'd like to do is stop sharing this particular spreadsheet. And now what I'd like to do is go back and revisit the spreadsheet that I shared, I believe, last month with the board, which is the peer-to-peer comparison, which, if the board will recall, Councilor Sansucci had some specific suggestions about how we could flesh that out. And flesh that out we have. And so I'd like to share with the board, trying to get the, set up my screen here so I can see more of the spreadsheet. Just give me a moment here while I muck around with my, oh, here we go, let's see. Let's do this. Okay, there we go. Can you all see this spreadsheet? You get a thumbs up?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what we're looking at here is peer-to-peer comparisons. According to the state library, they lump, for lack of a better word, the Beaverton City Library in with 3 other peer institutions of comparable size, scope, complexity. And they are our neighbor to the west, Hillsborough, and then our neighbors to the south, Eugene and Salem. And so some of the additional data points that we added since last time, in addition to our service population, the adopted city and library budgets, percentage of library expenditure, per capita expenditure, and FTE, and so on, is one of the things I mentioned earlier is the staff to manager ratio, supervisor ratio. So Beaverton City Library, for example, has a FTE count of 71, and we have combined managers and supervisors of 7. So that's a ratio of about 10 to 1. If you take a look at our peer institution, Eugene, they have a total of 103 FTE, managers and supervisors of 14. So that's a ratio of about 7 or 8 to 1. Hillsborough is 77 FTE, supervisors 16. Their ratio is actually about 4.5 or 5 to 1, much smaller, and so on. Some of the other metrics we're looking at, things like our annual book budget, and by comparison, library, the Beaverton City Library has the lowest book budget currently of all of our peer institutions, including Salem. And then annual hours of service, for example, also Beaverton City Libraries has the lowest amount. So these are some of the metrics that we're using to compare ourselves to our peer institutions. And then by clicking on this link, the fiscal year breakdown, what, as mentioned, we're hoping to do in conjunction with our colleague in the finance department, Assistant Finance Director Susan Cole, is basically come up with a 3-year plan for where we want to be in terms of the library's budget, our per capita expenditure, and then a metric that Susan suggested, our per circulation expenditure, library FTE, managers and supervisors, and our book budget. So I hope that next month at this time, I'll have some additional data to share with the board about what some of our targets are. And the hope is that by providing the budget committee, the city and the budget committee with a 3-year plan, it'll provide the opportunity for us to present a much stronger business case by demonstrating a vision, a goal, a strategy spread over 3 years that can help the city and the budget committee sort of wrap their heads around and get a sense of the direction which the library goes, which can be difficult to do when you're just doing a budget on an annual basis. And so what we're hoping to provide is a sort of a shortish term look in terms of where we want to go as an organization, in terms of not only our budget, but our strategy, as well as, you know, its connection to our reorganizational efforts, because of course they play into and tie into our budget, as well as sharing information about our strategic plan, which I'll mention as part of the director's report. So all these things, as I mentioned, they all come into play and feed on one another. The strategic plan, which helps to inform our reorganizational efforts, which also helps to inform our budget. So they're all interconnected, and they're all, the goal is for all of them to come together at once and provide a vision for where we believe, where we'd like to go as an organization, where the library leadership believes we need to go in an effort to better serve our community for the long term and better position ourselves to be more responsive to the needs of the community, to create an organization that's more flexible, more adaptable, and more responsive to the needs of community, and have the capacity to do so from a budgetary standpoint. So with that, I'm going to pause and open it up to any questions from the board at this time.
I'm kind of dumbfounded that Eugene is spending more than twice as much on materials as we are for just about the same circulation, in fact, slightly less. We're certainly much more efficient than they are.
That's true.
They're open quite a few more hours too.
And
so
they
that's
also
remarkable.
have a significantly higher budget than we do, about to the tune of about $3.5 million.
Well, but the book budget being a big chunk of that.
Yes.
The difference in the book budget. Do you have any idea why they're so well endowed relative to us?
Well, here's one, I'll venture the following. Eugene, unlike the libraries of Washington County, is, to my knowledge, completely reliant upon their municipality for their budget, apart from anything that they might receive from their friends and their foundation. Therefore, I think that as such, they may have, as a result of which, built a stronger business case, a stronger relationship, a stronger reliance on their city, on their municipality to provide the needs of the library, as opposed to Washington County libraries, for whom, in most cases, the lion's share of their budget, and Beaverton City Library is no different in this case, comes from the county. And so, as such, the city hasn't necessarily need to take as active a role in supporting the local library. Whereas in a city such as Eugene, they're completely reliant, almost completely reliant upon their municipality for the budget. So I think, you know, it's sort of one of those cases where, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. And so I suspect as a result, the library there has really made a concerted effort to make their pitch to the city in terms of their needs, and perhaps has done a better job in the process of building a business case for their municipality as far as what the library wants to do, what it needs to do in response to its community, the needs of the community, and the city has responded. So that said, to your point, I'd be what I'd like to do is follow up with my colleague Will O'Hearn, the director of Eugene, who, by the way, participated in one of our strategic planning brainstorming sessions and had high praise for it. Happy to reach out to him and see if he has any suggestions and recommendations and advice for how we could build a better and a successful business case for increasing our capacity and our budget.
Sounds like a great idea.
Glenn?
Something there obviously works. Any other questions?
Yes. How has the pandemic impacted budgeting?
Well, so far, according to the data that we have, so that came in at the end of December, or mid-December actually, on sales tax revenue, real estate tax revenue, which is, of course, the lion's share of revenue for the city and from the county for that matter. Because again, the library receives its budget from the county and the municipality. So far, the impact of the pandemic on real estate tax revenue has been negligible. That said, there's a great deal of uncertainty as to whether or not that will hold true 6 months from now. When, let's say, for example, the next round of data becomes available, anyone's guess as to whether or not the revenue will come in as expected. That said, our finance director has anticipated and built into next year's budget an expectation that there will be a decrease in tax revenue, with the expectation or anticipation that some residents of the community will find it difficult to pay their tax bill in its entirety. So short term, there does not seem to be any impact. Long term, the prediction is that will be some type of impact. The county, on the other hand, is estimating that they will be able to continue to provide funding at the same level, with a anticipated increase in assessed value of about 3% for the next fiscal year, which means that, so this year we received approximately $6.1 million from the county, combined. They're from the general fund and local levy combined. Next year, they're anticipating, based on that roughly 3% increase in assessed value, that the city of Beaverton, Beaverton City Library rather, will receive approximately $6.3 million from the county, assuming that their prediction holds true.
Thanks, Glenn.
I have a question.
Position open for the assistant director. So is this already considered position and it is included in the budget, or it is going to be a proposed one?
So that position is going to be a newly proposed position. And Kristin here, correct me if I'm mistaken. My understanding is that the library, Beaverton City Library, has never had an assistant director position.
That is correct.
Okay.
For the last 25 years, at least, yes, in my memory.
So that said, that is something that actually we are hoping to submit that as a request via as part of an agenda bill that will go before the city council in next month, in March, for their approval, with the intent and the hope rather that we could hire that position while in this fiscal year and bring that person on board to assist with implementing some of the ongoing changes as described as part of phase 2 of our reorganizational effort. So that's our intent, is to, if approved, to hire that position this year. And just a couple word about that, in recommending it this year, in order for that to be successful, that request, which by the way is also going to include a request to add the 2 new supervisor positions for this fiscal year, has to be budget neutral. In other words, the request for these new positions can't result in any increase in this year's budget. In order to do that, what we're proposing is, as I mentioned, we are proposing to eliminate program budget 0553, which is access services. So that program will go away, and the division manager position will be eliminated from the library's budget. Plus, there are a couple other vacant positions. One, a senior librarian position at the branch, and a few others off the top of my head I can't recall at the moment, that we're not planning to fill. Plus, we could also use, according to our finance director, any unspent funds from other programmatic areas of the budget that we can apply towards these new positions in order to come in at budget neutral. So those numbers are being crunched as we speak by the city's finance director, and we're hoping to have the results of that either later this week or the beginning of next, to give us a sense of how close we are to being able to be budget neutral. And if depending on the outcome of that, we may have to go back and make some adjustments in terms of that request. Maybe, for example, we don't hire both supervisors this fiscal year, but we hire one, and then we put in the request for the second one in next year's budget. So there's a variety of ways that we can do this. But we are hoping, as part of this year's, in this year's budget, to hire at least a few of these new positions, as mentioned.
Thank you.
No other questions then?
So how is the
So we'll move on.
fine you are not collecting? It is we are fine free right now. So is it affecting your budget? It's not.
Yes. So we had budgeted approximately this year about, well, it's a pandemic. So for the prior to that, I think we had budgeted about $65,000 in anticipated fine revenue. I think we came in about 75,000 the last year, a result of both fines for that we collect, as well as the split for the online fine revenue that comes in, that the county collects, and then they distribute between all the member libraries using an algorithm, et cetera. So that said, we're looking at a decrease in revenue of about $65,000. And according to our finance director, that's really a drop in the library's overall budget, considering the fact that our this year's budget is about $11.1 million. So the impact actually is much higher to some of the other Washington County Cooperative Library Services member libraries, particularly the community libraries like Garden Home and Aloha, who are much more dependent on the fine revenue. But in spite of that, out of recognition of the benefits and the value of going fine free, they have agreed to support the effort. So that said, if you encouraging folks, if they're so inclined, to make donations to local Washington County libraries, please do keep in mind some of those association libraries who have been the most impacted by going fine free. But fortunately for us in Beaverton, given the size of our budget, it's really really a drop in the bucket when you compare it to our overall budget. And that said, in the first week alone, close to 10,000 residents of Washington County were able to, their library cards were reactivated as a result of going fine free when their fines dropped off, because about 10,000 of them had their library cards blocked and they couldn't use the library because their fines were in excess of I believe it was $10. So by that very act alone, just by going fine free, we reduced a barrier to access for close to 10,000 residents of the county.
That's good news. Good to hear that.
Hard to measure that in dollars and cents when you think about the value, what that means. And studies have shown that the people who are impacted the most are the people who can least afford to pay their library fines. So the impact is really significant when you think about it in terms of a community benefit.
That's true.
That's fantastic.
I have one more question. So has you support like remote working during this pandemic and going forward? So has anything included in the budget for their equipment or anything that staff needed to work from home or remote?
Yeah, so we did make some adjustments to this year's budget. We had to, talking about the city as a whole now, because of course the library wasn't the only department that was impacted by remote work. So the city did invest more in things like laptop computers and equipment to support remote workers, as well as discussing things like providing a modest stipend to folks, for example, who may need to increase the speed of their broadband internet connection, or may wish to purchase a task chair, to provide better support while doing remote work. And then in terms of next year's budget, we're thinking about the library's budget in particular. There really hasn't been any significant increases specifically related to remote work, because most of that was actually addressed in this fiscal year. Although we do anticipate, that said, that we'll still have a percentage of library staff who will continue to work remotely, including those staff who are able to provide programs in a remote environment, provide reference services. And in fact, it's interesting, one of the benefits of remote work means that, for example, just a couple of weeks ago, we closed the library early to the public because of some inclement weather. We actually had 2, maybe 3 programs scheduled that evening. And in quote unquote normal times, if we had to close the library early, we would have had to cancel all of those evening programs. This time around, however, because they had all gone virtual, we were able to continue to offer those programs in the evening, since they were not impacted by the library closure.
Yeah, that's
Right,
the
and we should
benefit
remind
of remote.
people that the fiscal year starts July 1st. And that's the budget we're looking at now, the year beginning July 1st, when things will certainly be different, although we don't yet know how.
Okay, if there are no additional questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Sorry, Glenn, I do have a quick question, if you don't mind, about the Access Services Department.
Yes.
What are the cost-saving measures? So if that department, I take all the personnel would be put into different departments. So what are the cost-saving measures of disbanding or reorganizing that entire department?
The biggest cost saving is actually the elimination of the division manager position, which will allow for the addition of the assistant director or another supervisor, depending on how you slice it and dice it. Plus, it will also, I believe, and this is part of the overall intent, help to make us as an organization more efficient, as well as providing additional opportunities for cross-training of library staff, as well as additional opportunities for growth, development, and advancement in our organization, which, given the dearth of supervisory positions, we really don't have a lot of opportunities for growth and advancement within the organization, which is why you see, if you look historically, and again, Kristin, correct me if I'm mistaken here, you've seen if you look historically, Beaverton City Library, we've had a lot of people pass through the library over the years. They come here, they gain experience, and then they go elsewhere when they want to take a supervisory or a management position because there's so few of them available. Sometimes they find their way back, sometimes they don't. But adding this additional supervisory capacity will mean that we can do a better job of retaining our staff by providing them additional opportunities for growth and advancement within the organization.
And if you promote from within, you would actually have some cost savings, I'm guessing, because you might be, in essence, replacing people at or near the top of their pay scale, top step, with people at the bottom.
Yes. And also reduces the need for extensive training. I mean, there's a lot of benefits from promoting within. Besides, it's just good policy to reward and recognize people for their longevity, for their service, for their talents. So that's something else that we want to begin doing more of. And it's also good for the morale of the organization as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Good. Is that everything you had on the budget, Glenn?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll move on then to the bookstore situation. Okay. And everybody, I hope, had a chance to look at the PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, did you submit that in advance?
Yes.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to pull that up. Or
maybe I didn't. Did everybody see that or not?
Huh, some reason
I guess not. So
I
we are
didn't
seeing this
receive a PowerPoint.
Having trouble finding that. Give me 1 second.
The same with me. I didn't receive any PowerPoint.
Oh, there it is.
Kathleen, I cannot handle how cute your baby is.
Yeah, she's growing.
She's already, you can see her getting bigger. It's crazy.
Okay. Can you guys see the Book Corner presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
You, good. Okay, now I gotta figure out how to get rid of this thing here. Sorry, when I'm working on my laptop, it just makes it a little bit more of a challenge. Okay. All right, so I'm going to run through the slide deck fairly quickly because it contains a lot of information. But if you recall, about 1.5 years ago, we had a couple approach the city who owned the property adjacent to the Book Corner. Book Corner is a city-owned property leased to the Friends at an exorbitant rate of $1 per annum, $1 per year. It's located at the corner of 5th Street and Washington Avenue. The adjacent property is next door there, so you can see on the map. And it's zoned for mixed use development, which means residential, commercial. The proposal is to build 31 rental units plus 1 to 3 commercial or live work units. Developer signed on to, committed to purchasing the Book Corner site at market value, which was appraised this past December at $430,000. Cities required the developer requested rather than to provide affordable units via write-down, which means the city would contribute towards the project to help provide and to assure that some of those units would be affordable. The Book Corner's physical retail operation would move to the main library, of the 2/3 of that physical operation, which would live in a portion of the library's lobby, main library lobby, as well as on the first floor, where some of you may be familiar with the existing bookshelf that used to house the Friends items for sale inside the library. So we would expand that out by another 4 or 5 shelving units to increase the capacity. And then in the back of the house, we would provide space for processing of book corner materials, space for storage of some of their excess inventory, as well as intake for donations. The city is also committed to helping the Friends identify space for their online sales operation, which is growing in terms of its sales operation. City is also committed to spending up to $140,000 as called out for in the feasibility study to incorporate those elements of the physical retail operation into the library. So the city has undertaken a significant commitment, both financial and otherwise, on behalf of the Friends in order to make this happen. So preliminary design cost estimates have been completed. The city council has given the green light to the city to continue with negotiating with the developers to finalize the design and to conclude the negotiations and to move ahead with concluding those. And then the next step would be breaking ground and construction, which just jumping ahead to the timeline. Where is that timeline? Here it is. Commence construction could begin as early as a year from this summer. Back up a bit. Yeah, we talked about the benefits, so on. Here's the drawing of the floor plan of the interior of the library. So here's the entrance. Here's Hall. Sorry, this is Hall Boulevard. This is 5th Street. This is the library entrance. This is the lobby. The cutout space of the library where the portion of the retail operation would go. And you come into the library space itself. Over here is where the Friends shelving unit used to live. And then we would just extend that out by some additional shelving units to provide additional space inside the library. And then back of the house, space for shared processing, storage, intake. And then finally, some drawings of conceptual drawings of what the design would look like. This is a view looking across the street from the library towards the new development. This is a view looking west down 5th Street. This is a view looking east. And this is the back side of the building. Back to the schedule, and proposed opening would be in 2 years from this summer. So summer of 2023, if everything goes according to plan. So any questions about the book corner integration project?
I have a question. I know that the book corners, one of their continual biggest issues is issues of space. Is the space allotted in the back of the house of the library sufficient for all of their books, all of their catalog?
No, there's no way that the library in its existing envelope could provide adequate storage space for the entirety of their storage. So that said, the Friends will need to continue. Currently, my understanding is they have an offsite storage. They'll have to continue with that. And then, as mentioned, the city has committed to helping the Friends identify some alternate space for their online sales operation, which would include storage of the inventory for their online sales. The storage that we're proposing to incorporate in the back of the house is a compact shelving unit off of the loading dock. But in order to accommodate the entirety of the excess inventory for the Friends would occupy approximately half of our back of the house space in the library. So we'd essentially have to relocate either the automated materials handler or our materials division in order to accommodate the storage. And I'm sure you can appreciate that that is not the most optimal use of that space for storage purposes.
Thank you. That leads me to another question is, so I assume then that they will be continuing their online sales. Is that also going to be partially run out of the library, or is that going to be off-site?
No, as mentioned, that will move off-site to an alternate location, and the city is committed to helping the Friends to identify alternate sites for their online sales operation.
Okay.
Which would include space for storage of their excess inventory for the online sales operation, plus some office space for the online sales operation.
Okay, so everything that would be at the physical library would be for library use and library sales, so for the in-person.
Well, no, they would actually be for sales of Friends, because the Friends would be operating, they would be responsible for the sale of those, because that would be part of the Friends operation. Basically, what we're proposing is to bring inside of the main library the physical Friends retail operation between the lobby of the library and inside of the first floor. And then in the back of the house, providing some processing space and storage space. But that again would be, those operations would be run by the Friends and other volunteers. So that would not be, library staff would not be involved in those operations. We'd simply be relocating those operations, a portion of that operation, the physical sales operation and processing and donations intake, into the library itself.
Thank you.
But the Friends would still be responsible for its operation.
So Kathleen, did the Friends board like this for the Friends?
I think their main concern is space. It's that's because they have, I think they have books in people's garages. They're getting thousands of books a month. They have more books than they know what to do with. So it's to the point where they're selling them to, I don't know if it's thrift books or where it is, but they're selling it by the pound just because they have all these extra books. So I think they're also concerned about not stability, but they want to make sure that they do have a plan and they know what's going to happen, and they're not just going to be dropped from their existing space. So I think they just want to have a plan in place, and that'll make them all feel much better.
May, you had a question?
Oh, is it just a temporary measure or relocation? Is that going to be a permanent place somewhere, not in the library, I mean?
So the relocation of the physical retail sales operation of the Friends into the library is intended to be a permanent move.
Permanent.
Of course, that's subject to the Friends and other factors. But as far as the library is concerned, our intent is for that to be a permanent move. Now, could the Friends decide otherwise? Of course, that would be their decision to make. And then with respect to the online sales operation, as mentioned, the city is committed to helping them find alternate space for the online sales operation. And again, subject to the terms of the lease that the Friends would be signing with the new landlord as a tenant. So if they, depending on whether or not the length of the term of that lease, whether it's a short term or a long term, or if they find alternate space, all that is subject to to change depending on circumstances, depending on the Friends business model, which has changed over the years as well. Given the nature as of its operation, which is not unusual for Friends of the Library operations across the country. They are subject to change depending on a variety of factors, so that's not unusual. But we're committed, as far as the city is concerned, the library is concerned, that the inclusion of the Friends physical retail operation to the library as a permanent move.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I have an opinion here that I feel kind of obligated to express, even though it may not be entirely relevant to the library or the Friends, and I think it's probably good for the library. As a citizen, I don't like it at all. And I realize Metro dictates infill, and so a certain amount of Trumpification of Beaverton is unavoidable. But this is the kind of project, and the city keeps approving them, that adds a whole lot of infill to the city without doing anything about the existing traffic problem, and creates existing traffic problems. And in conjunction with that, because of the book corner's proximity to the library's west parking lot, every single one of these new housing developments, multifamily housing developments in the city, they have a requirement that it must have a minimum of X number of parking places per unit, and it's never enough. There's always overflow parking into the neighborhoods. And in this case, I would imagine a lot of people might fairly permanently park some of their vehicles in the library's west lot, where it's literally a walk in the park away, and certainly have their guests and visitors park there as well. And that's a concern. But anyway, any other questions or comments on this?
I have one more question, Glenn, about the donations. Did you mention that donations will also be part of the back of the house of the library space?
Yes, that's our intent, is for that donation function to also move over to the library in some capacity. We're still working out the details of that, the specifics, but yes.
Okay.
And one more thing to add, and that is in terms of visibility, it's our belief that in incorporating the physical retail sales of the library into the main library proper, that will increase foot traffic, no doubt, and visibility for the Friends retail operation, given the greater numbers of visitors to the library as compared to the book corner. So that will increase visibility of the Friends retail inventory and result, we think, in increased sales given the increased traffic. Plus provide greater overall visibility for the Friends as a whole, particularly given the fact that they're going to be located in a very high traffic area in the lobby, very visible. And for those of you who are familiar with the Friends retail operation in the lobby of the Fort Vancouver Regional Library, the downtown branch, the Friends retail operation is the first thing you encounter when you come into their lobby. Can't miss it. And there'll be very similar setup in the lobby of the main library in Beaverton. So they're going to be provided a very prominent place in the library when you first walk in.
In conjunction with Kathleen's earlier question, is it possible the Friends could utilize some of the space in the old City Hall building now that the police have moved?
That question came up earlier on in the process, and the answer is unfortunately no, because the city has other designs on use of that space, and as a result, there was no space available for the Friends use in the Griffith building. It also raises, frankly, questions about commitments that the city has made to the Friends and other local community organization at the expense of other local community groups. So if some of you may be aware that there are quite a number of local community groups here in Beaverton who are very interested in space, meeting space for their groups. And historically, they have not had space made available to them. And whereas other community groups have been privileged with space provided for them by the city at a very low to no cost historically. So it raises questions about from an equity standpoint, from a historic standpoint, as far as the looking ahead to how the city wants to allocate space for its local community organizations. Do they want to continue to privilege groups that have historically benefited from city-owned space at the expense of other community groups who have been denied space? So I think that's something to think about and to consider when you think about groups such as the Friends of the Library, who have enjoyed privileged status in the city and benefited from city-provided space at virtually no cost for approximately 3 decades. So something else I think it's important to consider, to think about when in thinking about the overall project and its benefits and its impact. So that said, I'll just say that I think the city has been very generous to the Friends historically for several decades. And I think this plan also, you look at the overall amount of space proposed and the amount of money that the city is committed to making this happen. The city continues to be very generous to the Friends as part of this project. I think it's important to note it from its historical perspective, as well as from the standpoint of other local community groups who are also interested and competing for a very limited amount of city-owned space for their groups.
Fair enough. Glenn, we're getting fairly close to the end of our meeting. You must have other items in the director's report as well. Can we at least get to a few of those important ones?
Yes, thank you, John. I just want to share that, and I think I may have another slide to share with you. I think
Quick question. What is the result of the survey that you have sent? So what is the things that it has been picked up?
The survey?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, thank you, Sarah. I can share that. Thank you. I just want to make sure that
Thank
I
you,
got
John.
that. Dun, dun. Please. Here we go. Strategic plan update. Okay, pull that up. Okay, let me share my screen. This will be the last thing that I share tonight. Okay. Okay, can you all see that? Okay. So, strategic plan updates. Spoke with the board last. I believe we had shared information about the feedback we received. Can someone mute got some background noise? If you're not actively speaking, can I trouble you to mute your microphone? Thank you. We shared feedback we had received as a result of our mission, vision, and values brainstorming sessions. Now what I'd like to share is feedback that the results of a survey that went out to ask community partners and the staff to vote on their preferred mission, vision, and value statements. So the good news is that we have growing consensus between the two groups on a preferred mission statement, between the community partners and the library staff, with a strong preference for the second of two proposed mission statements, which is The Beaverton City Library is the heart of our community, providing materials and services in welcoming environments for all to learn, discover, explore, and grow. And thanks to you, to members of the board that took the time to complete the survey. I want to make sure I mention that. And then similarly, for our vision statement, there was also a consensus pick for the second of the two statements between community partners and library staff on the following vision statement, which is the foundation for an engaged and thriving community. And then for our values, similarly, seems like we're doing a Vulcan mind meld between the two groups, community partners and library staff, consensus on we asked folks to choose 5 on the 5 values: welcoming, inclusive, whoops, I overshot the slide. Apologies for that. Welcoming, inclusive, helpful, responsive, or helpful, sorry, inspiring, and oh yes, also helpful. So welcoming, inclusive, helpful, responsive, and inspiring were the top vote getters for our values. And then finally, our strategic directives, similarly, there was consensus between the two groups on the top 3 strategic directives, which are welcoming place for all, place for discovery and inspiration, and lifelong learning. So next steps in that process are the library executive team is reviewing the results and also coming up with their own strategic directives, which I realize in retrospect we hadn't done as a group. So there may be some slight changes to the strategic directives, but the mission, vision, and values will remain the same. So again, mission, Beaverton City Library is the heart of the community, providing materials and services in welcoming environments for all to discover, explore, and grow. Vision, the foundation for an engaged, thriving community. Our values, welcoming, inclusive, inspiring, helpful, responsive. And strategic directives, for now at least, welcoming place for all, place for discovery, and lifelong learning.
Any questions about that for Glenn? Good. Did you have any other key, maybe hit us quickly with the subject areas of anything you didn't have time to get to, and we'll save those for next time?
One very, very quick update, and that is, the board may recall that we have a space plan that was completed in August of 2018, which called for the build out of 3 study rooms on the 2nd floor opposite the where our computers are. I'm pleased to announce that the bidding process has been completed. We have selected a winning bidder and hope to commence construction on the build out of those study rooms with an additional 4th study room in the mystery alcove space on the 2nd floor, which will also double as office space for the library social worker who is under contract with Community Action. And we hope that build out, the construction will commence sometime this spring. And we anticipate that it will conclude in approximately 2 to 3 months. So the timing will work out quite well. While the library is open in a limited capacity to the public, this is a perfect time to begin the build out of those spaces. They will accommodate approximately 6 to 8 people. self-contained spaces. They will have flat screen monitors in each of the rooms, with the exception of the one that's going to double as the office space for community action.
Well, it's good news. So they'll be ready by the time we're getting back towards normal, if everything goes well, it sounds like.
We hope so.
Good. Anybody have anything else you'd like to bring up tonight?
Just very briefly, I have not yet gotten a chance to go back to the library, but my husband and my son have. And my son was so excited to go back to the library and pick a book off the shelf. And he got it, according to my husband, he got it off the shelf and he was frantically looking around for a place to sit where he could sit and read it, and discovered that there are no chairs. So, but he was very happy to take it home. So I'm just so glad that we're getting close to that point. And thank you for everything that you're doing to reopen.
Yes, thank you, Kathleen. And that no chairs is by design, and that is in order to discourage folks from hanging out because of the pandemic. Hence, we're calling this grab and go. But thank you, and I appreciate the feedback. I'm glad that your family was able to take advantage.
It is wonderful to be able to go back into the library again, even on a limited basis. Absolutely. Good. Anybody else have anything? Okay, next month, we may hopefully have time for Kathleen's presentation. And one of the things that I had brought up to Glenn and Kathleen, we haven't had a chance to discuss, is maybe at some point at a future meeting this year, when things settle down a little bit, having an open-ended discussion about the First Amendment and how it relates to libraries. I think this is kind of a critical time in the country's history where there are so many First Amendment issues in the news, with the controversies regarding social media, with misinformation, disinformation, all those things going on. And we're likely to see perhaps some proposed legislation regarding the rights to free speech and free assembly. And libraries play a very important role in that, certainly as disseminators of truth. And you know, where are libraries going to emerge on the other side of this? And are we going to be facing any controversies? These are the kinds of things I have in mind. If anybody wants to start thinking about it, or propose maybe anything related to that, I think it's something that would be good for us to be prepared for in case something changes the way our library has to be. Good. Well, there being no further business, I will call the meeting adjourned at 7:35, and thank you all very much for coming again tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Kristin, for taking notes, hosting the meeting.